Switzerland is in shock after President Trump imposed one of the highest tariffs in the world on its exports to the United States. The move has led to a conversation about Switzerland's place in a changing world. What now for the country and its long-cherished neutrality? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, for more than a century, the Swiss have lived in splendid isolation with a thriving economy, largely shielded from global shocks. Swiss neutrality has been a cornerstone of the country's success. But President Trump has now thrown all of that into confusion.
From the iconic Swiss Alps to luxury watches, from its world-renowned chocolates to its historic political neutrality, Switzerland has been a place where tourists seek tranquility and the rich luxury. All this could be under threat due to President Donald Trump's tariffs on Swiss exports. At 39%, these are the highest tariffs in Europe. It has sent shockwaves across the country.
I'm very scared for what will happen in Switzerland, for all these small companies that will pay mainly. Making small countries like us pay, I find that, well, I won't say unfair. It's a bit stupid, but it's shocking, worrying.
Switzerland sells more to the US than it buys, defined as a trade surplus. But for the US, it's a trade deficit.
Well, the problem with Switzerland, we have a $40 billion deficit with Switzerland. And I spoke yesterday to Switzerland, but we have a $40 billion deficit with Switzerland. That's a big deficit.
The Swiss president reaffirmed the country will push for a better deal.
The Federal Council will, of course, continue to strive to improve the customs situation. It will fight for this. It will commit itself to this cause. It will continue to negotiate intensively with the aim of achieving an improvement within a reasonable period of time. However, this ultimately lies in the hands of the American president.
The tariffs have also given rise to the debate whether the Swiss can maintain their historic position of political neutrality. Isolationism has served Switzerland well up until now. Not being part of NATO or the EU allows the country to have a free trade agreement with China. But since the announcement of the tariffs, it has left the Swiss establishment in a state of disarray. Swiss businesses are warning of thousands of job losses if the 39% can't be reduced. With the Trump administration putting economic pressure on Switzerland, will the country move closer to the EU and abandon neutrality?
Well, let's meet our guests on this one. I'm delighted to say in the studio here with me, we have the political journalist and broadcaster Adam Boulton, and the renowned business journalist Ian King joins me too. And from Portugal, from Faro, we have Nina dos Santos. She's a journalist, broadcaster, and the host of the podcast Control Alt Deceit. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Adam, first of all, when I think of Switzerland, I think of a very calm, neutral, wealthy country that has had it so good for so long, and along comes President Trump.
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, President Trump basically is shaking down the whole world in terms of trade with tariffs, and the Swiss did attempt to negotiate a deal with him. That didn't go very well, and they ended up with, on paper, 39% tariffs, which, of course, is a very high number. However, it is worth putting in the caution that the majority of Swiss trade with the United States is gold and jewellery and pharmaceuticals, both of which are subject to exemptions at the present moment. So if you work out the effective rate of the tariff on Switzerland, Swiss exports at the moment, it works out at about 13%. So that's kind of in between where the EU have ended up and where the UK has ended up. So it's bad. It's bad for everybody, but it's not disproportionately bad compared to what's happening to everyone else.
Ian, talk to me about the sense of shock in Switzerland at this, because they very much thought this was not going to happen to them.
They were absolutely flabbergasted, not least the fact that it was announced on their national day. So it was a huge political bolt from the blue. But it was also the fact that they tried to get in early with Trump. They'd been led to believe by the administration that they were probably going to be the next country after the United Kingdom to get a trade deal with Trump. And they offered actually very, very advantageous terms. They offered similar terms to the ones that the EU offered Trump. So to get this big 39% hit was a real shock for them. And there are very specific reasons why I think Trump has gone after them. And I mean, Trump obviously looks at it in a very simplistic way. You know, he looks at trade imbalances between the two. And the Swiss had a traded goods surplus with the US last year of about $60 billion US, and that was up 56% on the previous year. And Trump obviously thinks this is really unacceptable. And he actually said that to the Swiss president. You know, you're ripping off Americans.
Nina, to you, if we look at the figures here, US trade, hugely important for Switzerland. 18.6% of their exports go to the United States. They're even now talking about some sort of furlough scheme to protect jobs in Switzerland, to head off these tariffs. I mean, the Swiss are very worried.
Yeah, they're very exposed. They're obviously extremely exposed also to the European Union, which is where 2/3, if not 3/4 of the shares of their goods go to as well. And they're finding themselves, you know, next to other countries like the EU that have faced that big shakedown that Adam was talking about. But they do have a little bit of leverage in the form of a big US fighter jet contract that they've ordered. They have committed to ordering 36 of the most sophisticated F-35 fighter jets from a big US defense contractor, switching from their earlier orders of French fighter jets in 2021. And now what you're starting to see after Switzerland has been wrong-footed by these punitive tariffs by Donald Trump's administration is that the political climate in Switzerland is changing as well. They're starting to talk about potentially pausing that contract or pausing it until they can, you know, get cost disputes locked down from the United States. So perhaps that big defense contract, if they do stick to it, will help to ameliorate relationships in the future with the US and also bring down that trade balance a bit. But as Ian was just saying before, lots of the irony behind this is that it is gold that people are heading to, the safe haven currencies like the Swiss franc, the safe haven commodities like gold, precisely because Donald Trump is upending the international world order and people are feeling very insecure about that. Switzerland is economically a bit of a beneficiary, oddly enough, of that insecurity, being a neutral country.
Thanks, Nina. Adam, how much of a reality check do you think the Swiss have had then over the last few weeks?
Well, I think, you know, if you look at the modern history of Switzerland, they have moved closer to the European Union. Certainly in practical terms, they're not a member of the European Union, but they are a member of Schengen. They effectively do have some freedom of movement, and they also make some contribution to the EU budget. So they're a lot closer than post-Brexit UK is. In fact, the offer from Barnier, you remember he had those famous steps. Britain ended up, I think, on the 5th step out. Actually, on his map, Switzerland was only on the 2nd step because of it did accept some of the EU's control. Now, the issue currently in Switzerland, although because their parliament works very slowly and then they have to have referendums and their arguments about whether you have a nationwide referendum or you also have to break it down by cantons. They are currently considering, you know, what's called the third package, which would bind them even closer to the EU. And a lot of the debate in Switzerland now is going to be whether they want to go formally closer to the EU, how heavily the EU will press and say, well, look, you're going to have to move further away unless you accept that. And even if there's political agreement, then there's a referendum at the end of it. That's how Swiss democracy works. And that could reject closer moves to the EU. I mean, after all, there was a formal application to the EU some decades ago, which was then voted down in referenda because the people did not want to lose their independent identity.
Ian, I just noticed on the issue of the EU, a poll last year, support for EU membership is just 17% in Switzerland. So clearly, as Adam says, a lot of political obstacles to go through, a referendum. It's not going to happen, is it? They are not going to join the European Union.
It feels not. I mean, the point that Adam makes is very interesting. I mean, the sort of history of the Swiss relationship with the EU, particularly over trade. And it was something that the UK tried to grasp for when we voted to leave the EU. We wanted a sort of Swiss-type arrangement where you just looked at things on a piecemeal basis, industry by industry. And Barnier, as Adam says, was very keen not to go down that route again. I think it's been a cause of annoyance to the EU for many years that the Swiss has all these little individual trade agreements. So this is what they're trying to do now, is formalise this in the package that Adam described. Yeah, it's going to go to a referendum and it'll probably get voted down.
Is it a fair assessment, Ian, that in the business world, Switzerland has had life very, very swish for a very long time?
Well, let's not forget, this is a country of only 9 million people, and it really punches above its weight in terms of, you look at the corporates that Switzerland's produced. So we were talking about pharma just now. They've got two of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies in Novartis and Roche. They've got Nestlé, one of the world's biggest food and drink companies. They've got UBS, one of Europe's biggest banks. They've got some really, really good, strong corporate businesses. Confectionery, and I mean, everyone knows Swiss chocolate, Swiss watches, which we haven't really touched on yet. I mean, I think Swiss watches, 16.8% of their output goes to the US, so it's a big, important client in that way. They're a great producer of machine tools. These are all products, by the way, that are going to be hit with the full 39%, which is on top of existing US tariffs as well. So it's a country that, as I say, it punches above its weight in terms of, you look at its population and its sort of geopolitical status as a neutral country.
Nina, to you, President Trump is fixated on trade deficits with the United States. But the reality is a lot of Swiss people don't want to drive American vehicles. They live in twisty, mountainous alpine roads in some of their towns and villages. They don't want big US gas guzzlers. They don't want American chocolate when they have what they would consider to be some of the best in the world. I mean, that trade deficit is not going to change anytime soon.
No, and these are arguments that you hear from other countries that are members of the European Union, even if Switzerland, it doesn't look as though is on the path to that, certainly not for now, and other countries inside the EU that are neutral and not neutral, like Switzerland is. They make those exact same arguments to the United States, saying, look, we have different values, our customers want different things, and we have different styles of democracies and different appetites for different goods and services. And it doesn't matter how much the US will try and funnel hose its goods at our consumers, they're just not going to take them. But I think just going back to the business climate that Ian was talking about, neutrality also offers Switzerland that very sort of placid, staid and predictable type of political environment that actually is kind of out of kilter with today's world, especially when Donald Trump is trying to shake the world order from within. And that also does help businesses invest for the long term in Switzerland.
Well, Nina, let's talk about neutrality and defence then, because I see they spend only 0.7% of GDP on defence, and the Netherlands gives 8 times more to Ukraine than very wealthy Switzerland. Are things going to change in that sphere, do you think, because of Trump?
Well, it's clear that Switzerland is already aware that it's going to have to spend quite a bit more on defence. In fact, if I'm not wrong, they're moving up their defence spending targets to 1% of GDP. Yes, you're right in saying that that looks incredibly paltry, considering as up until recently, the target for NATO members was 2% of GDP, and that has been lifted really swiftly towards 5% level. Switzerland is nowhere near at that level, but it does have crucial aspects and unique sort of aspects of its society that make it a very difficult country potentially to overrun if anybody tried to. It has hundreds of thousands of reservists in the army who can be called up at 24 hours notice. Men have to do national service until a certain age and have guns at home ready to be deployed if the country is attacked. And also, they're aware that they don't want to be a weak spot in European defence if Europe does find its borders challenged, whether that's a border challenge of NATO countries first, that then affects Switzerland further down the line. So my observation is, having filmed pieces in Sweden and Finland when they were transitioning from neutrality to NATO membership, is that actually neutrality can bring a population together. It can create nascent technologies in the defence industry that perhaps when other countries are part of a big collective structure like NATO, they don't feel that they need the impetus to create. And that could be Switzerland's, saving grace if ever things got difficult in Europe in a few years' time.
Thanks, Nina. Adam, to you, neutrality is the absolute cornerstone of Swiss democracy. That's not going to change, is it?
It seems extremely unlikely that it will change. I mean, it's convenient for the Swiss because we have to remember that talking about the percentage of GDP which they spend on defence is slightly deceptive, bearing in mind that they do have this conscription. So actually their standing army is bigger than our army in terms of numbers, even although that, they've got only 9 million population. They've got something like 100,000 of troops, as it were, ready to go to defend themselves.
So hang on, the Swiss army is bigger than the British army?
Yeah.
Wow.
But they're doing that through conscription, so that doesn't necessarily hit GDP in the same way. Also, I think, one point I have to remember is that it is convenient for the rest of the world to have Switzerland being neutral. It is the European headquarters of the United Nations. It is where the Red Cross is based, the World Health Organization. And, when people were looking for a neutral country for an important summit, where did Reagan and Gorbachev go? They went to Geneva. Where is the proposal for the next Zelensky-Putin summit? Again, Geneva. It is useful both politically and economically in terms of its private banks to the rest of the world. It is a convenience. So unlike Finland or Sweden, which really felt Russia breathing down their necks, which is, a good reason for giving up neutrality and joining NATO and the rest of it, those pressures are not on Switzerland in the same way because no one really is talking about invading Switzerland. I mean, even wasn't invaded in the First World War, Second World War, Germans thought about it, didn't do it, although both sides, the Germans and the Allies, accidentally bombed bits of Switzerland. So there isn't that pressure to force them to sign up with the rest of Europe that there is on, other countries.
Ian, what can the Swiss offer Trump? Because ultimately we're dealing with a transactional president.
I mean, this is the problem. I mean, ultimately, you can't do much about that trade imbalance because, as Nina said, Swiss people don't necessarily want to buy American goods. And unfortunately for the Swiss, they make a lot of goods that the Americans want to buy. They can potentially offer to invest more. I mean, that's one of the things that the EU has done to try and win Trump over. They promised this massive investment programme by EU companies in the United States. Well, we've already discussed the way that Swiss society functions and Swiss politics functions. I mean, it's very, very difficult for the Swiss government to sort of lean on Novartis or Nestle and say, right, we want you to go and invest billions of dollars in the US, although potentially that is a way out of it. They can potentially offer to buy American liquefied natural gas. So they can offer to sort of spend more in that way. The thing about the trade numbers, I should point out, this trade imbalance, it's really, really distorted by gold. And gold, I mean, Switzerland refines 2/3 of the world's gold, but it's effectively a middleman. It's really taking gold often from London or New York, melting it down into gold bars and stamping it, and then it goes back out again. It's a low-margin business. The Swiss themselves aren't making that much money out of it, and yet it's massively distorting in terms of the trade imbalance. So that's a bit of a tricky one. And interestingly, obviously Trump was fixated on it. Initially, we thought that gold was going to attract these tariffs, and then Trump turned around and said, gold is going to be exempt from the tariffs. There's not a lot they can do, really, other than there are only 9 million people, as we've discussed. They can't really they're not big enough to sort of dangle things in front of Trump. And also, it's not really in their way. It's not in their manner. The Swiss make commitments that they can deliver on, and that's not Trump's world. Trump likes big, flashy things that, as we've discussed, Swiss politics, Swiss society, it might be difficult for a Swiss president to sort of get that past their public.
Thanks, Ian. Nina, Switzerland is the 6th biggest investor in the United States. Is there not a risk for President Trump that some of their companies might just say, you know what, we're going to trim back investments if you're going to treat us to 39% tariffs?
Well, there may be that risk, but as you were just saying before, very often politics and business are very finely tuned in a place like Switzerland because its economic future is so ingrained in the country's security. So it has a huge private banking industry. All of that is built upon trust. As we were talking about pharmaceuticals, having the extra research and development is largely because you have technical expertise in Switzerland and people feel that they can trust their products if they put them in their mouths. And the Swiss culture is such that takes generations to build up. Just as, for instance, saying you're neutral takes generations for people to actually respect the neutrality of your borders. You can't just wake up from one moment to the next and say, I've decided I'm going to be neutral, and assume other countries won't invade you or will recognize that neutrality. So all of this is sort of baggage and investments in Switzerland's culture and political and economic culture that have lasted for generations. And I think that's one of the reasons why, as Ian was just saying before, it's quite difficult for Switzerland, because they're kind of out of sync with the world that Donald Trump himself envisages and is trying to create elsewhere around the world.
And Nina, do you think one side effect of these Trump tariffs, certainly in Europe, could be that Switzerland, it's not going to join the European Union, but do you think they could suddenly be perhaps a little bit more friendly or favourable in terms of business with their European neighbours?
Well, that may well come to pass, actually. But I think the other thing that we're certainly noticing in the context of defence is that they've been a lot more amenable to getting involved with things like the EU plans to sanction Russian companies, remove their businesses from Russia when Russia entered its phase of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. You didn't see a huge amount of dithering from Switzerland in that point of view, because they realised, well, actually, from a reputational point of view, we can't be completely neutral on this particular subject. They've taken in a lot of refugees from Ukraine, for instance, and other war-torn countries. So they are cooperating an awful lot more with the EU on some of these crucial security dynamics that are, of course, let's remember, one of the key priorities for the EU in the future, because they know that the United States doesn't just have it in economically for Switzerland. The EU's also had its issues with these big trade tariffs from Donald Trump. And America has made it clear that they're going to retrench from security of Europe as a whole, and that also would include Switzerland.
Thanks,
even
Nina.
if it is neutral.
Thanks, Nina. Adam, I want to talk about pharmaceuticals. Trump has not gone there yet with the tariffs, but the reports I've read say that if he does, Switzerland will be looking at like a hit of 0.7% to their GDP each year. That's massive, no matter who you are.
Well, what Trump is trying to do with pharmaceuticals, as we've just heard, is to repatriate and get more chemical production, as indeed he's also doing with tech going on in the United States. And what we've been hit here in the United Kingdom with is him effectively saying that the low prices which the NHS has negotiated with American drug firms are unacceptable because Americans are paying more. So what he's actually saying is the British are going to have to pay more for drugs. So that's why we've got a near tripling, for example, in Mount Jaro. So that will probably be one of the issues with the Swiss, what level they are providing drugs to other countries and what level they are charging for their drugs in the United States, which could affect them very badly. But, you know, ultimately, if you're a drug producer, you're not too worried about higher prices.
Ian, just come in on that. That figure of 0.7% of a hit to Switzerland's GDP. If he follows through with that, do you think these drugs companies will just up sticks and do what he wants and basically take their production facilities to the US?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it takes years to establish these manufacturing facilities in some cases. And these companies, you can't force Novartis or Roche to carry out an investment. That's down to the board of directors and ultimately to the shareholders if they disagree with what the board are doing. So this is one of the problems, as I say, that the Swiss have. They can't necessarily make these sort of big blandishments that some other jurisdictions have been able to.
It does come to something, though, when we look at a country like Switzerland, so wealthy, so secure, so safe, and they're running scared of Trump.
But as we've discussed, they're a small country. I think this really does ultimately draw them closer into the EU's orbit. I mean, the EU is a comparable economy to that of the United States. In terms of population, it's actually slightly bigger. In terms of GDP, it's slightly bigger when you take the whole of the EU. So they can really negotiate with Trump on his own terms. And yet even they've had to swallow 15% tariffs. The Swiss don't have that optionality.
I don't think it's even just the EU. I think it's broader European, including the UK as well. I mean, Trump has said in so many words, trade is bad. Now, European countries, including Switzerland, including the UK, are trading nations. So if effectively Trump is going to try and obstruct trade, we're going to be forced in ourselves collectively more, which is one of the arguments that was being made this week, for example, by Nick Thomas-Symonds, the British minister. And Switzerland will be in the same boat of looking for closer ties and a closer relationship with its immediate neighbours within Europe.
Nina de Santos in Portugal, thank you so much. And Ian King and Adam Boulton in the studio with me, thank you. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.